Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed participants and colleagues, thank you and welcome to the Localizing Human Rights in the Context of SDGs, Principles and Practices. This is a launching event of our handbook, Localizing Human Rights in the Context of SDGs, a Handbook for Cities. So my name is Windy Arini. I'm a program officer at Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law based in Jakarta. And this event is brought to you by Raoul Wallenberg Institute and our partners, SDGs Center, University of Lampung, Parahyangan Catholic University, and RTM Nagpur University. We are still waiting for a few more participants. But let me just give you a bit of introduction first to this event. So before we start, I would like to express our sincere thanks to our panelists today. We have a very interesting panelists lined up for you. And for you, our participants, for taking the time to join our event today. To our partners and organizers that I mentioned previously for making this event and this handbook a reality. We have a packed and exciting schedule today. Shortly, we will hear welcoming remarks from Dr. Jason Squire. He is our director at the RWI Regional Asia Pacific Program. And thereafter, we will have Bahram Ghazi from OACHR Geneva. Then the main event is the introduction to the handbook itself, which will be delivered by our esteemed partners and myself. Then we will have a panel discussion with experts and representatives from local government in the Philippines on what we can do further to continue the great work that a lot of institutions and organizations, including RWI, to further promote the agenda of localizing human rights. So we have a few number of participants already with us, so I think we can start. Before we hear the welcoming remarks from Jason, I would like to kindly ask all of you, if you want, to turn on your camera and take a picture. So this event will never happen without a picture. So let's try to turn on our cameras and then take a nice picture in this event. And our colleague Lina will help us. Lina, can you help us, please?
All right, everyone, give your best smile. Okay, I will come. All right, could you, yeah, all right. Now we are going to start. 1, 2, 3. Wait a moment. One more. Okay, wait a moment. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Lina. So now let's have Dr. Jason Squire, our director. Jason, you have the screen.
Thanks, Wendy. Thank you very much to everyone for being here today. This is a really a pretty special event for us. We've put a lot of energy into this handbook, and it's a really great output from our excellent partners that we've worked on this with, and also us testing it in places like the World Human Rights Cities Forum and discussing it there and trying to make it the best possible product we could at this time. And it's always important to, I think, recognize, or what we're trying to do is that this is not a static product. We will always be active to try and present the best version of this handbook as we possibly can. So it remains something that we will update and that we remain committed to. So I better start off with the formal side of things. So thank you all for coming to this launch event of Localising Human Rights in the Context of SDGs, a Handbook for Cities. This event is brought to you by RWI in collaboration with the SDGs Center in the University of Lampung in Indonesia and the Parahyangan Catholic University in Indonesia and the RTM Nagpur University from India. I wish to start by congratulating the 3 university partners that we've got here today and the RWI team for getting this together and also, of course, launching it. I'm very pleased how this handbook has turned out. I think it's always, well, it was always aimed to answer the question, what does it mean by human rights cities and what do you do to achieve it? And the fundamentals are present, and I'll let the team step through them in our sessions, in our presentations. But I think that the concepts of inclusion and participation and monitoring and evaluation and human rights-based approaches are fundamental to this handbook. So I think you'll recognise all of those in the book. What's that? Oh, I've been spotlighted. Okay. Most of you would know who we are. RWI is a research and academic institution which is headquartered in Lund in Sweden. We have offices in Asia, Africa, Eastern Europe, and a small presence in Latin America or in Cuba. So we're doing some work there. And we mainly work across 4 thematic streams, which is human rights in the environment, inclusion and non-discrimination, access to justice, and business and human rights. Institutionally, RWI has made a commitment and believes the response to the gaps in localising human rights obligations by states and sub-national authority structures is through the engagement and the applications of a human rights city model. This is something that we as an organisation have made a commitment to, and we have strengthened it in our next strategy. But it's essentially the cities are where people are now. There's been a huge migration to cities, and anyone who's living in Indonesia or in Bangkok or Manila or Delhi, they are huge now. Where the city ends and where the suburbs start, and now they're just massive entities, and they are something that is going to, of course, continue. And we need to think about how we can respond to those urban settings. And particularly in climate change, this is one significant area that warrants its own inquiries, actually, because people can be displaced due to climate events in cities. And if I think about Jakarta, there's always flooding, there's always displacement, there's always risks of health concerns, of course, come through that. And of course, I'm not even talking about COVID, which we're all still living with. So over the past few years, RWI has been active in bringing together stakeholders with the responsibility of localising human rights, gender and environment in the context of SDGs. This is a major part of our work, particularly in the Asia Pacific region. We've done a lot of work in the areas of business and human rights. We've been working with NHRIs and the National Human Rights Institutes, UCLG ASPAC, who are here today, who are a partner of ours, civil society, universities, academics, national and local government representatives. It's really important that we recognise that everyone's a stakeholder in this. Of course, institutions are a major part of progressing human rights, but also the right holders themselves are an important group or individuals to be part of any discussions, particularly vulnerable groups like people with disability or people of age. I think COVID-19's really emphasised the inclusion of older people in the discussion around their treatment. and the responses of states and institutions to their care and well-being. So, I mean, these are great examples of how a human rights cities concept, which is underpinned by participation and inclusion, can respond to a number of risks and impacts on their functioning. And COVID-19 and the last few years has really emphasized the importance of institutions and people in the care and well-being of the most vulnerable. We still, the human rights cities concept is still emerging. It's gaining momentum, certainly, and that can be gauged by the World Human Rights Cities Forum, which is an annual event that's held in Gwangju, South Korea. RWI and UCLG ASPAC and the city of Gwangju are jointly involved in this initiative, and it's growing in stature every year. I would encourage you, if you have the means and you have the opportunity, is to come to the World Human Rights Cities Forum in Gwangju, and you'll really see how how it functions and how many people and institutions and countries and representatives and people are very interested in this as a concept of localizing human rights and bringing human rights into the consciousness of people in a practical way, which is so important. So this handbook was designed specifically to, we use the word demystify, because what a human rights cities concept is, because it sounds, you know, it sort of has an all-encompassing title, but in real terms, it's a practical guide. What we've tried to do is a very practical guide for people and institutions and duty bearers in governments who are wondering how they can move forward. This is a step-by-step approach, and we're very, very aware that it's a big task, but at the starting, you have to start somewhere. So the handbook aims essentially to provide a practical guide, as I said, for local governments. It's also designed to enrich skills and knowledge on human rights principles, norms and approaches, and apply them at the local level, empowering local stakeholders to claim their rights and to mainstream human rights. So again, it's really is designed to be something which is in your hand, gives you a guidance of how to do it really, and how to start the discussion, because at the basis of everything is stepping into a process of discussion and discovery. Often, you know, answering the question, how are human rights a concern of people who have to deliver water to communities? Well, hang on, here we go. It's actually a fundamental human right. So, I mean, these are the type of things that once you actually dive into it, you realize that human rights are fundamental to all of our existence. And for us that are in the human rights field, that can seem pretty obvious, but for people who are outside of it, when you start talking to water engineers, they don't really understand what are human rights people doing in the room here. So it's actually a fun process of actually having a discussion point. And the amount of times that you have a discussion with the water engineers and they realize that it is a fundamental human right, they really do, they see another avenue of advocacy for themselves often within their own institutions, because they've got a willingness, but just moving forward is always difficult for people. So trying to give a framework and empower people with a human rights-based approach is useful. And it's fundamental, of course, for humans and societies to thrive, as well as, of course, fulfill rights. So I better end. I think I'm taking longer than I'm allowed. So anyway, I'll end by saying that I wish to, I really hope this handbook contributes to ongoing global efforts to promote a better and more robust implementation of human rights at the local level. RWI will continue in this area, and we will be monitoring what happens with this handbook. We've already received some very encouraging approaches from, I think if I can say, the Philippines. People in the Philippines are very interested in how we can use this book, and we're very interested in now taking on a monitoring role and being able to work with national stakeholders to let them use the book and make sure it's of its usability and its applicability. And then what we'll do is we want to get feedback, and then we want to update it to make sure that it's actually continually relevant. Relevancy is fundamental with this handbook, and we are committed to ensuring that. So if there is anyone in the participants here today that think that they would like to trial it or to give it a go or to open discussions, contact Wendy, contact me. Let's have a discussion and see what's possible, because we're very keen for people to use it, and then we're able to take a monitoring role and just sort of act as an observer to the process, so we can really make sure that it's as good as it can be. And that's our real aim. And we are also, I might end on saying that we would like to receive feedback on it. If you don't think it's got relevant, if you don't think there's some areas it's missing or whatever, contact us. Again, we're very keen to make sure it's available and it's usable. So that's it, Wendy. I've probably gone over my time, but thank you very much. And I really want a big shout out to the RWI team, because anyone who's been involved in developing a handbook knows it is exhausting. Editing it isn't, it's been a nightmare, but anyway, making sure that it keeps true to the original concept is so important. But I also want to thank our friends who have offered editing and to constructive feedback and given us a bit of a nudge when we need to improve something, and we couldn't have done that without our great partners. So thank you very much. We all own this now. It's now a public property. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jason. It does take a village. And without further ado, and I want to give the screen to Bahram Ghazi from OACHR Geneva. Bahram, you have the screen, please.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be with you, and also congratulations for this publication. It's a very useful handbook, and really to try to make it as practical as possible for people and local governments to use it is really key. Before entering into the importance of local governments and human rights cities from an international perspective, let me just say a few words on the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, for those who don't know us. So we're the leading United Nations entity on human rights, and we work toward the realization of the international standards that are in the Universal Declaration and other international agreements that states have ratified. We have our headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, office in New York, and more than 90 country presences. So one of our main tasks, of course, is to assist states at all levels in fulfilling their human rights obligations. So let me just first of all say a few words on the increasing recognition of local governments at the UN level. You know that the United Nations is a member state-driven organization, so it is the national governments that represent state in forums, discussion, that take decision, that engage the state in various ways in the declaration, and so on and so forth. But all these global discussion have an impact on the local. And at a certain point, it's also the local government that needs to implement those decisions or to deal with those commitments. So since a number of years already, there has been a networks of local governments that have been trying to push the voices of local government within the international discussion and within the UN. I think this has come a long way, and there is a increasing recognition that local governments are very key for the implementation of the United Nations objectives, whether it's in terms of development, of security, of human rights, it's environment, and anything else. So in the last General Assembly, the Secretary General of the United Nations presented an important document that is called our Common Agenda. And this report lays the ground for common work on a number of things: global solidarity, renewing social contract between government and their people, looking at prosperity from other angles than only economy. And within that, he emphasized that the need of an effective multilateralism that makes the United Nations effective. And within that, he calls for a stronger, more network, inclusive multilateral system that would include various actors, in particular cities, local and regional governments. So I think the key thing is that, first of all, there's a link between the global and the local. And this link needs to be reinforced. The dialogue needs to be, to grow. And there is, of course, this idea that without the local communities, government, etc., it's going to be very difficult to implement any of the global decisions that are being made, whether it's the Sustainable Development Goals or human rights, etc., and so on. And on the other side, it's also important for the global level, the United Nations, other, to learn from the local practices and what is going on and how concretely those declaration norms, etc., are being implemented at local level. So now, why are local government important for human rights? And if we can go to the, sorry, I forgot to mention if we can start the PowerPoint, so we can go directly to the, yeah, you can skip this one. And this one was the presentation of OHCHR. You can skip it also. I already discussed the Secretary General. So the next one, please. Thank you. So I think from an international human rights law perspective, the human obligation of state extend to all levels of government and to any exercise of government authority. So that means basically that all branches of government, whether it's executive, legislative, or judicial, and other public authorities, and also joint ventures eventually, and at all levels, national, regional, local, are in a position to engage the responsibility of state. So generally speaking, there is a collective responsibility of state to implement human rights, but of course, not all levels of governments have the same competency and jurisdiction. So a lot depends on the country, the type of government, if it's centralized, decentralized, etc. But maybe let me give you an illustration. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Just to explain that special rapporteurs are independent expert appointed by the Human Rights Council to look into thematic issues and provide advice and support to different stakeholders and states. We have a special rapporteur specifically working on the right to adequate housing, and some times ago there was a report on the role of local government on the implementation of the right to adequate housing. So I think she highlights a number of issues where the local government can have an impact, a direct impact on the realization of the right to adequate housing. She mentions, among other, the prevention of eviction, development of infrastructure, the land use planning, upgrading of informal settlements, development of and administration of housing and social programs. It can be market regulation and resource allocation. I think it's important, as Jason was saying, to make this link between sometimes issues that are not seen as a human rights issue, but actually what it means in terms of implementation of these agreements. Typically, urban planning is maybe not seen as a human rights issue, but it's actually very much at the center of many of the human rights of the population. So I think what is important here is to see that clearly people look at their authority to uphold their rights. And because governments are the closest to the people, local governments, they need also to act, and they need to act on their claims and demands. So it's important that we look at how, given the resources and competencies and possibilities, these local governments are able to advance on these human rights. And I think, as Jason was mentioning also, the context of COVID has been very eye-opening for many. We have seen how much the different rights, whether it's the right to housing, education, health, food, etc., has been central to the response to the crisis. And it has also, this crisis has also exposed how inequalities and structural discrimination are present in every society, developing and developed countries alike. And it has also highlighted how much local governments have a role in upholding human rights, even in times of crisis. We heard many of these examples of actions during the World Human Rights Cities Forum that Jason was also mentioning. You know, it can range from a wide range of issues. We had moratoriums on evictions. For example, the state of New York enacted a Tenant Safe Harbor Act that prohibits the court from evicting residential tenants who are experiencing financial hardship to pay their rent. Barcelona has been very active in avoiding eviction and homelessness due to non-payment of rent because of COVID. We also know that, for example, in Malaysia, there has been some economic stimulus packages that were targeting urban renters by granting rental payment exemptions for those living in affordable housing programs. Same thing for Kuala Lumpur. In other places, there has been other types of intervention. In Senegal, for example, local government have provided food baskets to the marginalized and the poor families during COVID by using the local women's farmers product that they couldn't sell on the market because of the movement restrictions. So all of these ideas, these creative ideas, have been there. And it's not only things can be done, but it's possible for a local government to advance on this question. Now, one issue is to what extent these measures, some have been temporary, can become permanent and make societies more resilient, because this is one of the lessons from the crisis also. the fact that investing in human rights is also investing in society's resilience. And we've seen that in places where human rights processes were in place, where there was social protection, healthcare, non-discrimination, and access to basic services, those places have been more resilient to the COVID crisis. And I think that is also one of the reason why we see more and more local governments that are interested in the human rights approach. That can be, this human rights approach can be used as a tool for developing policies and program in a way that is holistic and possible with the possibility of assessing the impact and of these policies and programs to the specific groups. In terms also of this issue of crisis and coming out of this COVID crisis, just want to make a link also with the call of the United Nations Secretary General for a new social contract. So I think the idea here has been that for a number of years, there has been some trust lost between the governments and the people. And before the crisis, the COVID crisis, you could remember how many places in the world there was demonstration to claim various rights, whether it's employment or affordability or etc. And I think the idea here from the Secretary General is that there's really a need for a dialogue between governments and their people and to rebuild this social contract. And what he's saying, and I quote here, now is the time to renew the social contract between governments and their people and within society, so as to rebuild trust and embrace a comprehensive vision of human rights. And he also says it should also include updated governance arrangement to deliver better public goods and usher in a new era of universal social protection, health coverage, education, skills, decent work, and housing. I think it's important to this notion of the demands of the population and what is the response from the various levels of government. I think that's important. And one example that we can, I can provide, where our office was also mediating between the population and the government, is in Buenaventura, which is a city in Colombia of 400,000 people. And this is the most important harbor in Colombia. So 60% of the country's export and import goes through this harbor. Nevertheless, you have 80% of the population that lives in poverty. 40% of the population does not have access to water and sanitation service, and there's a widespread unemployment. So for decades, there has been demands of the population where to address this issue, but nothing came. So in 2017, there was a general strike that brought almost 70% of the population in the street. And because of this strike, finally, there was an agreement by authorities and the people on a number of issues: health, water, employment, through a participatory process with benchmark and also financing. And it's interesting to see that now the mayor of this town is one of the leaders that was in the social protest before. If we can move to the next slide, please. Yes, I just want here to make a bit of a, try to make a bit of a link between the discussion between the development agenda and human rights. As you remember, we first had the Millennium Development Goals and then the Sustainable Development Goals. Within the Sustainable Development Goals, it became very clear that without human rights at the center of development, the development efforts cannot be sustainable and bring long-term positive changes in society. So I think there is a number of things, and probably this will come up in the discussion in the context of the handbook. There's a number of things that needs to be taken into account for the development to be sustainable and fair. First of all, the free, active, and meaningful participation of all inhabitants, and in particular, those that are marginalized. So it's moving from people as passive beneficiaries to becoming active actors of their own fate. And we see that in many places, you know, the voices of the poor, people living in informal settlements, etc., are not heard. And that is one of the important things to take into account if we want the development processes not to further marginalize and discriminate various groups. And the fact is that also the communities themselves, they have very good knowledge and solutions for the development. There are in place in many cities since the 80s processes like participatory budgeting processes where people decide on the allocation and prioritization of a portion of a city budget, for example. That's one example of how participation can take place. There are, for example, in other places, the engagement of youth in city councils. And we've seen how much youth have been central to the response of COVID-19. And cities like Bignona in Senegal or Baguio in Philippines are increasingly engaging youth in public matters, which is a very positive thing. The second thing is that there should be some kind of accountability for respecting and promoting the rights of inhabitants within development by duty bearers. And that means that decision and processes need to be transparent, subject to public scrutiny. They must include free, fair dispute and complaint mechanisms. Again, at local level, in many places, you can find ombudspersons or places where people can go and complain or bring their complaints on rights. These places exist, for example, in the ombudspersons exist in Gwangju in Republic of Korea, in Jakarta in Indonesia, in Barcelona, Buenos Aires, etc., as a matter of example. But very central to development and human rights is that development processes need to address the root causes of discrimination and inequality. And that the topic of inequality is a hot topic everywhere, whether at international, national, and local level. And to combat these inequalities, this combat starts at local level. And for combating these inequalities, and I say inequalities in plural because it's not only economic inequality, it's also political, it's also environmental. There's a wide range of inequalities that needs to be addressed to looking at the economic, social, cultural, civil, and political rights of the population. And that's how we can advance on a long term. So therefore, these development activities should include strategy for the political, social, and economic empowerment of the people. And I think I will stop there because I think I've also talked too much, but I'm very looking forward to listening and learning from the next panel. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Bahram. It was very insightful presentation that you shared. And I particularly like the examples of the role of youth in city level, and that's precisely what we're trying to do since last year, and it yield a very interesting results with our youth in Asia. So we have a few more minutes before we go on to our next session for Q&A. So if any of the participants wants to ask question directly to Bahram, please just raise your hand, or you could just put your question in the chat box. I can see a few of our BLC alumni here, so it's good to see you all. Welcome back to our WI forum. And so, any question to Bahram? If not from our participants, maybe from our partners as well. That been this is also a learning journey for us this past 2-3 years. Mbak Sylvia? Yes, please, Mbak Sylvia.
Okay, hi Bahram. Nice to see you again. So my background is actually international relations, and when we are talking about the international arrangement, international regime, and the levels following, like the national levels, the local levels, one of the most discussed issue is how the trickling down is not really working. So what do you think about that? Is there any best practices of ensuring that this trickling down is actually happening? Thank you, Wendy.
Yes, thank you, Sylvia. I mean, you're raising a very crucial point here. It is true that we have somehow a disconnection between the international discussions, what is being decided at the global level, and what's happening at the local level. So how does the decisions that are taken, the resolution, for example, from the General Assembly or the Human Rights Council on different topic, trickle down, as you say, to the local level? How does the decisions by, let's say, recommendation by human rights mechanisms, such as the Special Rapporteur or the treaty bodies are the committees looking into the implementation of the different convention, whether it's on gender, on discrimination, economic, social, cultural rights, civil, political rights. How does this recommendation actually, I mean, how do local government are informed of this recommendation? What place do they play in reacting or implementing those recommendations? And that is still a problem that we're trying to address. There are good practices. Things depend a bit also on states. For example, there are some states where representation of states at international forum include representatives of local governments. So that makes them part of the discussion. And of course, they have also, not only they can express themselves, but they also have a kind of an ownership of those discussions. That is one thing. The other thing is human rights mechanism, but also you know, in the Human Rights Council is more and more aware of this connection and trying to make the linkages. So bringing you know, local governments inside events to express themselves, rapporteurs, so independent expert appointed by the Human Rights Council, also directly work with local governments on various issues. These are all ways of trying to bring a bit the local governments within the discussions of the UN. That being said, things are going also in the right direction. In his last report that I mentioned, the Secretary General Our Common Agenda report, he wants to establish an advisory group on local and regional governments. So this is something that we're working on, establishing the terms of reference, working with the networks of local governments to see how better we can integrate the views of local governments. But as you say, there's also the other way. How can we inform local governments of all the guidance, guidelines, decades of research and things that have been developed? That is something that I think we need to do through networks of local governments, through institutions like Raoul Wallenberg, etc., trying to bring this information and also sometimes translate it for a local context. And I think that's a bit what you try to do with the handbook. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bahram. And we have a couple more questions in the chat box. So one is from Kulin Bachpai. So, sir, how can we enforce the human rights alongside with SDGs? Because often the international laws perform poorly when it comes to mandatory implementation. And another, so if you can take both questions. Another one is from Helena. Do you think there is a need to articulate more within countries at what level responsibilities lies for different rights related to decentralizations of functions? So, yeah, please, Bahram.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for your question, Colin. I think there's two things I would say. First of all, as I said, development processes without human rights are not going to be sustainable, and so there's something there that needs to be taken into account, and that we cannot avoid. Now, it's true that when we talk about mandatory implementation, maybe some will not react very positively, but that is because I think we need to change a bit the perspective of what human rights are, and if you look at it only as a way of only as an accountability framework, you may miss on the fact that it is a framework that is very useful, that is very practical in developing development strategies, but in any decision-making processes, in any policies and programs that are developed at national and local level. So I think also that there is this issue that we really need to think of it as a tool that can be used to improve the way things are done. And then I think the issue of monitoring the progress is also very important. And for example, we at the office develop some monitoring tools, including human rights indicators, that can help in both looking at the progress that is being made at local level, but also how these processes can be improved or adapted to reach the right groups. For Eleanor's question, it is clear that one of the issues that we've seen through the discussion and at human rights with human rights mechanism, when special rapporteur visit countries, etc., is a clarity on the responsibilities of the different state entities in relation to specific implementation of different aspects of the right, because there is no one, you cannot say one part of the government is responsible for the right to housing. Housing has multiple dimensions. It can be affordability, it can be security of tenure, it's about physical integration in the urban settings. So all of these have different parts of the government probably coming in, but still a clarity on where people should go when they want to claim their right or see where the problem is. Yeah, this is an issue that comes in many places, including in federal states where sometimes the ball is being they kind of have this ball thrown from the national to the regional to the local on who's actually responsible for something, and this is important in terms of clarification of things. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, and thank you everyone for the questions. It was a very interesting discussion. I really I jotted down some notes actually. Thank you so much. So now we're gonna swiftly move on to the main event actually. So this is a presentation about our handbook. I will do it together with our partners, Dr. Sylvia Yazid from Parahyangan Catholic University, Dr. Payal Tore from RTM Nagpur University, India, and Dr. Unang Mulkan from SDGs Center, University of Lampung. So I'll start with a bit of background about this handbook. So then we will take turns in explaining like briefly about the handbook, and then you can post your questions or feedbacks in the chat box, or you can wait until the Q&A session at the end. So to start, why are we developing this handbook in the first place? So our research see that there can be a principal commitment to human rights by duty bearers across the region, but the practical enjoyment by rights holders can be problematic at times. And our research also highlights that practical tools or best practices examples available to assist duty bearers, such as local governments, is required or needed to enable a better realization of human rights at the local level. Then in 2019, RWI commissioned studies on localizing human rights in the context of SDGs in 5 cities in Asia. And drawing on that study results, we decided to develop a practitioner's handbook. In 2020, RWI identified 3 cities. So one is Bandung, Indonesia, East Lampung, Indonesia, and Nagpur in India, as relevant case studies informing the the substantive content of this handbook. The development of this handbook continued in 2021 with our 3 university partners here as co-authors. We will see a very, very short clip about the journey of developing this handbook. So Lina, if you can help me, please.
We believe that there is a linkage and complementarity between human rights and SDGs. In 2019, RWI conducted research in 5 cities in Asia, exploring potential and challenges on the process of adoption and institutionalization of human rights city from 5 cities across Asia. Through this research, we have identified practices of cities in adopting human rights city concept by local governments and stakeholders. There There are various ways of adopting and practicing of human rights city concept in these cities. Some adopted and practiced through top-down approach, bottom-up approach, and a combination of both approaches. The 2019 research highlighted a need to strengthen participatory governance and inclusion where civil society can participate in the city and district development planning. Human rights progress monitoring and reporting of the progress and realization of human rights city. We then aim to translate the studies into practical application through developing a handbook on localizing human rights in the context of SDGs. The development of this handbook consists of 4 main steps. First, start in 2019 by doing research in 5 cities. Second, research by 3 university partners, which include consultation with local stakeholders, such as local governments, CSOs, and experts. Third, co-design the handbook together with 3 university partners with support from UCLG, Asia, Pacific, and experts. And fourth, further consultation with local governments and stakeholders. In 2020, we identified 3 cities: Bandung, Indonesia, East Lampung, Indonesia, and Nagpur, India, as relevant case studies informing the handbook's substantive content. To support the research, university partners also conducted webinars, consultations with local governments and other stakeholders. Due to COVID-19, consultations have generally been conducted through online platforms. In the 3 cities, we identify more best practices in localizing human rights to increase public participation in local governance and the implementation of human rights in SDGs contexts. This handbook will offer local governments and stakeholders a theoretical framework and practical guidance on how to localize human rights and to enrich skills and knowledge on human rights principles and approaches and apply them at the local level in the context of SDGs. Among others, the handbook offers guidance to develop and integrate local indicators based on local needs and challenges through participatory processes. With this handbook, we promote integration of human rights-based approach to local governance and achievements of the SDGs. We believe that human rights-based approach will guide cities towards inclusive and sustainable recovery and resiliency against current and future crises. This handbook also provides strategy and alternatives on how to empower various stakeholders to claim their rights and to mainstream human rights in each step of local governance through participatory approach. It is our hope that through this handbook, more cities will be able to integrate human rights principles and approaches in local governance for an inclusive and sustainable cities where no one is left behind.
All right, thank you, Lina. So that was, looks like a very short journey, but it was very long. And as you can see in the video earlier, that this handbook is actually divided into 2 parts. And one is the theoretical bits that give a bridge to the more practical suggestion or recommendations that we offered in the second part of it. And actually, that's my cue to introduce the practical people that will introduce you to the practical bits of our handbook. First, we have Sylvia, and then Payal, and then Unang, and then afterwards we can have a rather short Q&A, but we will have time. Please, Sylvia, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Wendy. Am I audible? Because it's raining really hard here in Bandung. It's the global warming. Okay. Yes, so I would like to first acknowledge my team from Bandung, Mire, Marcia, Karman, and Rizky Widian. They are here, but one is also trying to recover from COVID, so they might not be turning their cameras. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Mbak Patricia. Thank you, Windy. Thank you, Mbak Lina. And hello, Ibu Tuti. Hope we can meet you someday. Okay, so my first part, the first part is the situational analysis. I'm really glad that Bahram said some things that match what we are talking about in this handbook. So thank you for that introduction, Bahram. And yes, the main idea for the first step is to lay the ground that human rights-based approach is actually what we need to use in analyzing what the situation is in the cities. So why do we need, we also talk about why we need to use general human rights framework. First, of course, because it is said that it's more general than SDGs. Like what Bahram said, that some people might be surprised that, well, they're actually doing what is supposed to be done for human rights. And then it is also considered more able to provide comprehensive understanding to begin the situation analysis. And then it can also be seen as a more open to various distinct human rights localization. And this is what is quite distinct about Bandung, for example, like the charter from Bandung, the human rights charter for human rights city charter from Bandung include creativity rights, because they said that Bandung is famous for producing creative people. So each city has their own way, their own rights to define the human rights that they would like to promote. And then more sources, so inclusivity, more sources such as academics, local government, NGOs, IOs, so everyone should be involved. And then where do we start? Yes, again, Bahram, we need to collect information from UN bodies, agencies, national human rights institutes, institutions, CSOs, academics. So it's bringing the knowledge to the local level. What has been agreed at the international level, at the higher level, and then we bring it to the local level. And then we need to understand the local context using HRBA. So this is the step one. And of course, we need to involve right holders as much as we can, making them the source of information. So no assumption is allowed. And then what is the objectives of this first step is to understand the local context and its relations with the protection and promotion of human rights, identifying duty bearers and right holders, and so who's responsible and who should be served, something like that. And then identifying issue priorities to be tackled based on the two previous considerations. Because our partner in Bandung said this one day, yang diinginkan belum tentu yang dibutuhkan, or what they want might not be what they need. So there's an issue of knowledge or ability to identify needs and interests. So that's what motivates us to develop this tool that can more or less identify what is actually needed. So the result of the first step is a report on situational analysis. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to explain the content of step one, the handbook. I mean, like, we can have another longer session for that, but this is just a teaser. So we talk about human rights standards for data identification. We talk about how participation should be there, data disaggregation should be guaranteed, self-identification is crucial, transparency is a must, but also at the same time, privacy is needs to be appreciated and guaranteed, and of course, accountability. So we talk about this at the beginning. So this will be the soul of the whole process. And we also talk about the methodology deriving from HRBA, like causality analysis, role obligation analysis, capacity gap analysis. So this methodology is used as a basis for the analysis. And then we talk about how to. So this is the practical part. We suggest the how to, but we don't limit the tools. So we give examples of the tools. We also give case studies from Bandung, Lampung, Nagpur, and even Gwangju. We contact our partners in Gwangju, and he provided examples too. So like, for example, first, you need to do CT scanning, where you identify the legal and policy framework on human rights. But we also emphasize here that identifying is not enough. It's also important to ensure that all the legal or the policy documents at each level are actually connected, or they sync with each other. So that's more important. So we need to ensure that it's not going in various ways. And then we also talk about how to review information regarding the city context. So we suggest what aspects that need to be looked at, that need to be paid attention to, and then how to identify the issues. And we also suggest to use the problem tree to identify the core problems. It was also mentioned earlier that we need to be able to identify the core problems. So we have been using these three pictures where we put the problem in the middle, and then the root causes, and then the symptoms and effect. Because in many occasions, we try to treat the symptoms rather than the actual problem, or rather than the root causes. So by this means, the development plan of each city from year to year, we only be treating the symptoms, and that's what leads to the same program year after year. So yeah, that's what we suggest. So this is an example. Jason mentioned about flooding in Jakarta. That's exactly the example. So this would be an example of the analysis. And after that, we move to the identifying stakeholders, separating between duty bearers and right holders. And we are not limiting the duty. We try to emphasize that duty bearers are not necessarily only the government, but it's how the city perceived who should be responsible in providing. So they might come up with, oh, there is this institution in the city that works with the government, and that institution is also the duty bearer. So there is how do I say it? There's a self-identification going on within the group of stakeholders. And then we go to defining local priorities. This is a picture of the testing process. So we did the testing process with our partners in Bandung, and this is what we did with them. And we use sticky notes so they can move the identification around, because what they might think as a symptom might actually be the core problem, or the other way around. So this is how we did it. What else? Yes, this is an example of the problem tree. I'll try to make it short. Let's keep that. Yes, these are the steps. So you will find these steps in the handbook. And of course, we are also planning to do it to develop a more practical modules out of this handbook. Before I go to the reflections, I also would like to share that we had the opportunity to use this digitally, virtually. So we did a virtual tryout of the problem tree tool, and it worked. That's the beauty of the pandemic. One positive side of the pandemic, we try new things, and it was possible to do it virtually. And so these are some of the reflections that we had after the testing with our partners. it was mentioned that the invited participants should be competent in issues being discussed, should genuinely represent the interests of the people, and should be able to articulate their interests clearly. So this is a matter of who should be involved in the development planning activities in developing the human rights city concepts or developing the plan to localize the SDGs. They should be people who are knowledgeable, who are competent, and who are eligible in representing the groups they are supposed to be representing. And then the time should be sufficient for doing a comprehensive situational analysis. So we try to avoid the merely stamping occasion, like, official activities where you just come there and say yes to everything. We really encourage discussion. The need to ensure balanced participation and equal access for public in analysis process. And this echoes the transparency element of human rights standard for data identification. As simple as when to conduct the discussion. If you conduct it in the middle of a working day, will the actual rights holders be able to come when they actually need to go to work? On that note, I'll end it there. That's a teaser for step 1, and I'll give it back to you, Wendy, so we can hear from Paya.
Yes, Paya, right over to you.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yes, we can hear you, Paya.
Okay, thank you. A very, very good afternoon to all of you. And I must say, the weather is equally bad in India as well. It's still raining here. So I, on behalf of my team, Vijayta, Girish, Abid, Sujay, I, Dr. Payal Taure, would like to present the step 2 of this particular handbook, which we have developed for the local government. Of course, I would like to say this, the main idea, or we can say the main working force behind this is Bindi and Patricia. Certainly without them, this step 2 is absolutely incomplete. So as Sylvia has rightly said, that every city is going to do their situational analysis, because we understand that because of various factors, as mentioned in step 1 as well, because of various geographical, economical, climatic factors, every city needs different things, or a different set of human rights which needs to be executed for them. And that is why the situational analysis, basically the diagnostic and a situational analysis reports, helps the local government to understand the local problem or the priority issue, as rightly said by Behram, that now in cities, the basic problem is regarding like urban planning and right of housing, which is completely ignored. And now this is the time that every city must look into this aspect. Probably the situational analysis report will give us that insight, that is the problem where human rights needs to be protected. So likewise, this diagnostic and situational analysis report helps the local government understand the local problems and issues, which then helps in developing or amending the local policies. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to tell here that we do understand, and we really gave a big thought on this issue, that there are certain countries wherein the policy development is not at all there, or there are certain countries wherein the policy development is in process, and there are certain countries and cities where the policy development is at advanced level. So considering these different situations, the local government, or if it is like top to bottom, then the central government, the one which we have in India, is the top to bottom, or from bottom up, or the combination of a set of governments, they need to decide that whether they should go for developing a new policy which can implement the human rights, or whether there can be any revision or amendment or modification or any sort of additions which they can do to the existing policies so that the human rights can be implemented. Now, why do we need a policy, or why this particular step has been inserted here? The reason behind that is, on one hand, because we have done the situational analysis, we know what is needed, and on the other hand, there are people who are in need of getting their human rights executed. So how to bridge that gap? Now, one way is certainly like countries like India, we can say that human rights are also part of morality or moral rights, but that will not work. You know, we need something on paper which can be implemented, and which will make someone accountable, which will make someone liable, which will make someone beneficiary. And that is why the policy thing needs to be there, and it is going to bridge the gap between something which is not existing towards something to whom they need it. So if this policy bridge is there, then the things become easy for not only for the local government, but also for the people or the citizens which is there. So when we try to identify like how this policy designing will work, then the first thing which we all agree with, that whenever there is a policy, certainly the policy creates an institutional framework which helps us in identifying the accountability, and it is the policy which helps us in like understanding that in what way the right holders needs to be empowered, so that unless and until, you know, I like Bahram and Sylvia both have mentioned the significance of participation, and we know that unless the informed participation is there from the people or from all the stakeholders, we cannot see the sustainable results. So these things are in line, that if we want to have a sustainable result and impact, we must have public participation. And when we have public participation, we have to see to it that it should be done on a non-discriminatory manner. It should be inclusive. It should try to have as many people or as many multifaceted people from the society as we can, and then only we can see a sustainable result. And of course, when we have a policy will of course help us in getting the implementation monitored. So monitoring and examination becomes easy when policy is there, and that is why if we have a good situational analysis, as rightly mentioned by Sylvia, if you know the root cause, then the starting point or from where we can begin with the drafting of policy will become very easy for the local government. Now, what is the objective of this particular step? It is like the policy development plan. Basically, it is going to address all the gaps and the issues which are there, but at the same time, the policy development must see to it that whatever resources which are available, they will be effectively implemented. Because if they are not effectively implemented, certainly they can become a cause for the violation of another human right as well. So that needs to be taken into consideration, and that is why identification of problem is again something very important, and based on that the policy will be there. At the same time, the policy development will allow the right holders to claim the set of their rights which they are in need. As again rightly said by Sylvia, that we know there is a tussle between need versus want. What I need may not be something which I want, or what I want may not be something which I need. And here the local government must see to it that how they can focus on needs rather than wants. And if at all they are focusing on wants, which like how they are going to prioritize that. And that is why allowing the right holders to claim their right as to what exactly they need is essential. And of course, the duty bearers in meeting their obligation. Because when it comes to localizing human rights, the local authority comes at the first place, who are going to take care, or who are going to see about the implementation of human rights. And that is why to make them aware or to make them know what exactly are their obligations are, that becomes extremely essential. If they again, if they are not aware about their obligation, then again they will treat only the symptoms and not the root cause. And the idea behind having this handbook or this whole research which we are conducting since last 2 years is to treat the root cause. And that is why the objective needs to be very precisely oriented towards duty bearers and right holders, and then only we can get a good policy which is based on the HRBA approach. Certainly, I will not go into the much details about the HRBA approach, but the methodology which we propose, the local government should adapt while framing or while designing or reframing or restructuring their policy is, number one, they should consider more about transparency and accountability, because certainly transparency will help in monitoring the mechanisms, particularly budget utilization and human rights standards, whereas consultation participation will help them to provide equal access to participate without any discrimination. Now, one thing every policy must consider is that no one should be left behind. And if we are not able to include the marginalized or the vulnerable or the exact person, whose human right is getting violated, then certainly the policy will not work or the policy will not be effective at all. So that needs to be there. So consultation and participation becomes important. And finally, the policy must be responsive towards the needs which are identified. And while saying so, we have to see to it that the direct and intentional reference of human rights at all levels needs to be considered, whether it is making a law or a policy or a practice. Now, how do we develop the policy? Now, this is one of the questions which we probably discussed for maybe 2-3 months continuously, that from where to begin, because as I have already said, we understand that from top to bottom or bottom up or combination of both, so different models are prevailing. So we wanted to consider that diversity which is there. At the same time, we wanted to provide a uniform model which can cater to this diversified need. And we, after the research and consultation, lot of webinars, personal interviews, group discussions, and a lot of desk research which we have done, we come up with these 4 stages of policy design. And to begin with, the first stage talks about participation or a participatory policy, a participatory consultation with the right holders. Now, they are the center, of all these things. Like, for whom the local government is doing, it is for the people, it is for the right holders. And that is why the very first thing, which after, of course, the situational analysis, because now the local government are aware about the root cause. So the first thing for policy development, or the stage 1, the local government should do is that they must ask the stakeholder, based on the priority based problems, that who would be the most affected by the proposed policy, or how it is going to create impact on them, or is there a practice or mechanism to lessen the negative impact, or best facility meaningful and accessible participation, or for that matter information which would be needed for them to become informed about their human right. Now, I can give you one example here, that when we asked people about basic human rights, then they question us, why do we need human rights? Because we are human, and that itself is sufficient for us, whereas they don't know that the air which they are breathing or the water which they are drinking, that is a part of their human right. So there are probably like more than 50% of people who are there who are absolutely not aware that this is their right, and they should question, or they should ask this thing from the government, that they must get potable water or fresh air to breathe. And that is why they all need to be informed. So the handbook provides a comprehensive mechanism and various tools with which the local government can consult with the right holders. Of course, while consulting, caution should be made or precaution should be taken that the consultation should be intersectional. It should not be sectional, or it should not be limited for a particular class of people, but it should try to it should consider all of them, everyone who is part and parcel of this society. At the same time, they can adapt various modes of consultation. Again, the handbook refers many of them, like online consultation and offline consultations. There are, like, this is again on the basis of HRBA. There is this practical guidelines which we suggest for effective consultation, wherein we talk about representation. It means that representation of all, no one should be left behind. Influence, then timelessness. We have to see that whatever policies which we are making, they should be realistic. They should have their own milestones. They should have their own deadlines, because unrealistic policy will not work. Similarly, the scope and process of decision making must be clear and precise. Effective forums. Now, I would like to give here one example of Musrembang, which we have also referred in the handbook. So that is one of the effective forums with which we can enhance the consultation. Similarly, the Guangzhou model, if we want to refer, talks about open forums, or for that matter, in India, we have ward meetings, which is a part of regular municipal corporation activities. So such type of effective forum should be there, wherein a productive, healthy consultation should be done. And then, of course, feedbacks and information which will be required for monitoring, enabling process and places, because again, jurisdiction is an issue when it comes to local government. So that needs to be precisely taken into consideration while drafting the policies. Then the second stage talks about consultation with the other stakeholders. Now, when we talk of civil society, we know that every segment and each one of us becomes an integral part of the civil society. And that is why we all must consider at every time, because everybody is playing a crucial role in the development of this society. And that is why consultation with other stakeholders, particularly, for example, NGOs or religious-led leaders, business entities, mass media, international donor agencies, etc., that is required. Now, I can give you one example. Now, when we had the focus group discussion about this feasibility of this handbook, at that time, we interacted with many of the academicians, and that time the academician says that the academic institutions can provide data which can be utilized by the local government in order to understand exactly what type of problem the city is facing, or what are the areas in which the local government needs to work. So academic institutions can contribute a lot by allowing their students, their research scholars to work and to provide a reasonably research data which they can utilize. Again, the handbook talks about various workshops, various tools like workshop, focus group discussion, and consultation. Similarly, the stage 3 talks about coordination between the local government agency. Now, this is probably one of the most challenging part which the local governments need to work on, because number one, we know that no human right cannot be studied or implemented in silos. They always needs to be combined together with multiple agencies at multiple level. For example, like as I have said, like from top to bottom, we are working with multiple agencies at one time. So we need to see to it that they should not work in solas, and that is why the local government must see to it that who is responsible for making a specific right respected, protected, and fulfilled. For example, when we talk of air pollution, so the Air Pollution Agency needs to work with the vehicular pollution agencies. Like they need to work together, then only some policy development will work. Another thing is, what is the existing mechanism for local government agencies to coordinate? Like, is there any annual forums wherein they are coordinating, or is there any particular team formation with which they are coordinating? So that aspect needs to be considered, and then only further development in policy designing can be done. Another thing for coordination and cooperation, I mean, why do we focus more on it, is that these type of coordination and cooperation certainly lessens the chances of getting things overlapped, and of course they help us in making the policy more coherent with what exactly is the root cause which is there, and of course it also guarantees the efficient use of the resources. Now, when this type of coordination takes place, it's helped us in creating a very strong and more comprehensive understanding about the human rights situation. Of course, you know, the coordination and cooperation, on the other hand, is also like practical benefits are also there for such type of coordination and cooperation. Existing policy, if at all there, then they don't need to create like redraft more policies. At the same time, what information is available, that can be revised, desired impacts can be found out, and then of course any other mechanism which is required, for example like grievance redressal or something, that can get accommodated into it. And then the fourth stage, this is rather the actual drafting, you know, when the local governments will start working on this. This is the stage wherein we can find them that they are actually writing the policy. In the handbook, we have provided a very comprehensive checklist, you know, with which the local governments can start with. But yes, of course, if we want to see that the human rights are getting effectively implemented, we cannot ignore the HRBA approach here. And the HRBA also suggested that policy designing needs to be with the loop of like structure, process, and outcome. So structure, of course, it's focused on priority, inclusivity, identification of governmental agencies. Like for example, when drafting the structure, we have to see inclusivity, and inclusivity says that you need to consider women, but the local government should go beyond and see that when we talk of women, are we talking about disabled women? Are we talking about illiterate women? Are we talking about underprivileged or you know, deprived segment of women, for example sex workers and all? So that type of structuring is required. So the local government needs to be very precise when it comes to structuring, because one set of law, like the set of law which the local government is making for women who are not disabled, will not work for the women who are disabled. So that aspect needs to be taken into consideration when the structuring of policy is done. Similarly, the process, like how many number of consultations, like how well the local government asked for like people to give their reviews, or how often the local governments engage with the citizens, and how many consultation has been taken care, like has been called for. So all that aspects needs to be taken into consideration, and then of course see the outcome, you know, that communication of the policy or the purpose for which that policy is designed, is it going to resolve the problem, the same problem, and that too in a desired manner? If it is not doing so, then we need to again go back, see the structuring and process, and then the outcome. So these three aspects needs to be taken. A comprehensive checklist, as I have already mentioned, is provided. There are certain elements. Now, these elements which we have derived, they were there from the research which has been conducted in 5 cities, then 3 cities, and then, of course, by the experts who were involved with us in this process of drafting. So these are certain elements which we have identified, which again talks of the human rights-based approach in the policy designing. Now, once we have policy that needs to be implemented, and the implementation needs to be in totality, and then only we can move ahead with the other stage, or we can say the other step with this handbook. So with this, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude and thanks to RWI, and over to you, Wendy.
Yes, thank you so much, Payal. So let's move on to the last but not least, Mas Unang.
Yes, thank you, Indy. I'd like to share my screen. Second. Yeah, is it readable?
I think you have to make it full screen. Yes.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. It has been a long journey actually in developing this handbook, and finally we have it now. So after identifying, I'm Unang Mulkan. I'm working for the SDGs Center at the University of Lampung, and I'm very glad to be here now. So after identifying the strengths, challenges, gaps, and opportunities in the city, as highlighted in step 1 by Sylvia, and filling the gaps through the development of policies, as discussed in step 2 by Payal, this part move forward by examining the monitoring and evaluations of those policies and programs developed in step 2. Yeah, this step actually we have some aspect that we got a 6 aspect here to discuss on this step. So it is important to see also the interconnection between the fulfillment of right and the achievement of SDGs in monitoring and evaluation processes, and how we should build human rights-based indicators as very right tools in monitoring and evaluations in the context of SDGs. Yeah, at the beginning of these sections, this handbook actually discusses a lot about the definition of monitoring and evaluation from general terms to specific context of human rights-based monitoring and evaluations. MNE in this context very fundamental on localizing human rights in the context of SDGs. So right holder and duty bearers need to understand a continuous process during the implementations of an action plan or a policy in an area, and also in that assessment undertaken at design stages in the program cycles, for the purpose of determining as systematically and objectively as possible actually the worth or significance of the program's intervention, strategy, or policy, as Payal's already explained. So what is the key message on this step actually? A human rights-based monitoring and evaluation, or MNE systems, brings the human rights perspective to the process by recognizing the stakeholder, both right holder and duty bearers. And in these sections, this handbook also considers the importance of digital technology on the MNE processes. This we got this input during UCLG ASPAC conference last year, and where the use of the IT-based tool can help the MNE process more accessible for all level of society. That's the idea how we should connect to the digital arena. This platform can ensure meaningful exchanges of ideas, inputs among local stakeholders, encouraging sharing experiences and learning among them. So this is our example how this works through online platforms, such as in Indonesia, we have a platform called Lapor, which aims to gather citizens' observation and complaints for responses by appropriate local government. So as Jason said as well, please maybe here you have more example where we can expose later on the new edition maybe, because this is very important to have digital tools in monitoring and evaluations. So the third step of the process is intended to assist a local government in defining right-based monitoring and evaluation mechanisms. So it is quite tough actually, because during our consultation with local stakeholders, they really want to relate this step to their existing plans for monitoring and evaluation of the SDGs. For instance, in Indonesia, there are more than 200 indicators of the SDGs set at the national level. So how this handbook should acknowledge and provide some solution, not adding some burdens to local governments in setting up new indicators, but how this handbook can incorporate monitoring tools for human rights policies and the SDGs, which can be both resources efficient and have the benefit of strengthening the right-based approach of the SDGs. So the output of this step is monitoring and evaluation plan. By sharing plan with actors involved, their specific roles, and the opportunity for stakeholders. So participation will be clearer if we use the HRBA mechanism on monitoring and evaluations. So methodology, human rights-based monitoring evaluations is a methodology for this handbook. So we got here, we explained 4 principles in monitoring and evaluations. As with previous step, using HRBA in the process of MNE can reinforce the accountability of duty bearers and strengthen participation and equity. So the handbook discusses 4 principles in MNE. 4 principles of monitoring and evaluation. First is participation. The monitoring and evaluation process must enable a stakeholder to fully enjoy the right to consultate and participate in decisions, both what will be monitored and how the evaluation will be conducted. And this is really important. This will, whether stakeholder, it is essential to measure the participation of various stakeholders. And the second is inclusion. Monitoring and evaluations policy, program, intervention in the realization of human rights in the context of SDGs should be inclusive, where all stakeholders, including vulnerable groups, can benefit from and can contribute in the interventions. And the third is the principle of accountability and transparency. We know that HRBA is not just a technical exercise in data collection and analysis, but is also a democratic process to share knowledge, strengthen accountability, and shift power relations between stakeholders. And the fourth principle is equality and non-discriminations, where this is very important in the sense that related to the importance and of disaggregated data, as Sylvia mentioned earlier, to track any gaps in policy programs, output, and outcomes such as age, disability, displacement, ethnicity, sex, nationality, migration status, etc. Based on the 4 principles of human rights based approach on monitoring and evaluations, it is important where can serve several purposes. First is a means to measure impact, output, efficiency, and effectiveness. This is quite important in design to achieve the target and indicators agreed by right holders. And this also can be connected to what local government already have, such as the indicators of human rights, such as in Indonesia, they have, and also the SDGs indicators at national level, and also a mechanism to strengthen accountability externally to right holder and demonstrate benefit to the of the policy implemented toward right holder affected by the policy in question. And this is quite good guidance for decision making, including strategies has been to improve, reorient, and discontinue the policy being assessed, and as a platform for enhancing participation through dialogue between among multi-stakeholders, especially the bearers and right holder. And the last is an aid for learning focused on realizations of human rights. For instance, achieving the SDGs target in an inclusive manners through indicators of and target of the SDGs. And in these sections, potential user of this handbook can see how is the interconnection between the fulfillment of the right and the achievement of the SDGs through monitoring and evaluation processes. And this is quite interesting, where we try to see, such as in part 1, we observe that the SDGs are anchored in human rights, with over 90% of the SDGs targets embedded in human rights treaties. So take an example of goal 11 of the SDGs about making cities and human settlement inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable, is based on several human rights instruments such as CRPD and CEDAW. So see, the Indian government, we use a case study from India, both national and local level enacted policies to ensure accessibility of public transport, and government will be making progress in fulfilling its obligation. So this effort on policies development and implementing those policies is really related to the SDGs 11, target 11.2, and readers or potential user of this handbook can elaborate more on this to see whether their design policies and implementation of policies relates to several goals of the SDGs. And this handbook also explains clearly about building human rights-based indicators based on HCHR defines these 3 indicators. So the UN office define human rights indicator specific information, as I saw Bahram Ghazi on the chat also provide more resources. This is very good because human rights indicators focus on duty bearers and right holders. So we can imagine coming at the question from 2 directions. First, what action are being taken, which focuses on the duty bearers, and second, what are the outcomes of this action or lack of action? So which focuses on what situation the right holder are ending up with, to help ensure that the human rights indicators capture both the action and outcome aspect of human rights. These indicators laid out 3 categories of human rights, which they call structural indicators. Payal also a bit mentions these 3 categories. First is structural indicators, which capture the state acceptance, intent, and commitment to undertake measure in keeping with its human rights obligation. So they really reflect the ratification and adoption of legal instrument and their existence, as well as the creation of institutional mechanisms necessary by for promotion and protection of human rights. So the second category is process indicators. This measuring duty bearers' ongoing efforts to transform their human rights commitments into the desired result. So this may include indicators based on the budget allocation, covered of the target population, or complaint received. And the last is indicators, outcome indicators. For example, include literacy rates, percentage of person with disabilities using public transportation. So this category capture individual and collective attainments that reflect the state of enjoyment. So this guideline can also help make sure that their design indicators are relevant to human rights-based indicators, which are categorized in this categories. So this is quite important whenever the local government have their own indicators already set by central and local government, but they can connect to these three components. Yeah, in the handbook, we also explains how we should design indicators. I mean, the indicators should be smart. They are simple, should be simple, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So this is quite well known in context of general management studies, but this is quite related to the human rights based approach, where like the those indicator development and selection should be participatory and stakeholder driven to ensure ownership, including considerations marginalized groups, fair and equal representation. And these indicators should be clear and straightforward, and indicators should be chosen to capture to extent to which human right has been incorporated. And we got some input from local government. Actually, they saw their existing indicators during consultations, and we read and we discuss those indicators. Mostly, yes, they really smart. I mean, it's quite straightforward and also more on quantitative. So the input should be indicators should have more a qualitative aspect rather than only quantitative aspect. So in this developing indicators, the idea is integrate existing indicators, if any, with human rights-based approach. For example, this can be done if there is national human right or SDGs metadata, as I mentioned before, because in Indonesia, for instance, the central government already set the SDGs metadata. When we discuss about the monitoring and evaluations tool using HRBA in the context of SDGs, the handbook provides three important tools. First is integrated the monitoring and evaluation metrics, and the second is participatory data collection method, and the third is the feedback loop for policy improvement. So these three we tested with local stakeholders last year, and it is quite interesting where for this, like we put this in our handbook. Take an example describing the linkages between human rights and the SDGs number 6 on clean water and sanitation. So the readers can see that the access to clean water as a right, and they can connect to which indicators exist and or which indicator maybe they can develop new indicators based on the right to access to clean waters, such as these indicators. Let's say local regulation to guarantee access to clean waters. This based on policy design and implementations, and also the budgetary allocation to provide clean water. And this is quite a quantitative element on these measurements. We see how much the percentage they allocate their budget for this, and so whether they have a program to provide access to clean waters, and percentage of the household with the access to clean waters, and also the coverage of housings with access to clean waters. This is kind of a outcome. So we see that the structures process outcome are illustrated here as well, and we see these indicators quite relevant to goal 6, where we found in SDGs metadata. So we can also put sources here, such as goal number 6, many of them, the sources coming from local regulation, local governments, but it is quite important also to see another resources, for instance, from non-government organization or from academia or university. Maybe they have a kind of, budget on this. So the second tool is participatory data collection methods. This is important how in a step 1, we describe the human rights-based approach to data collection, including principle of participation. So data disaggregation, self-identification, transparency. So in these methods, we can this can be conducted through several methods, actually, such as focus group discussions, through observation, feedback from right holder, and feedback, from a survey, periodic survey of the communities affected. And this is quite common also on the grounds. Some local government, they use surveys. But it is quite important to add more on focus group discussion, for instance, to see the reality or the qualitative data on this. And the last is about the feedback loop. This is the purpose of receiving feedback from right holders on the result of certain policy. Is mainly to increase accountability between right holder and public official as duty bearers. Other local stakeholder can also provide feedback on whether policy and programs conducted align with human rights principles during the implementation. This is quite important when the purpose of the feedback loop can be utilized to increase learnings about what works and what doesn't work, to increase availability of credible evidence for decision making, to increase accountability vis-a-vis right holder and other stakeholders, and also improve risk mitigations during and after policies and programs. I think this is quite, important, such as in Indonesia, where the feedback loops is often overlooked and quite important for the development or like the new policies if they need to be refined. And I think this is my last presentation. I hope this handbook can benefit to local stakeholders on localizing human rights in the context of SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mbak Sylvia, Mas Unang, and Payal, for the very comprehensive introduction to the handbook. I could not have done it better. And thank you for the participants to stay along during the introduction session. To make our time more efficient, I would like to call the participants to have your chat or comments or the feedback on the handbook through the chat box. So we can move on to the next, the last session actually, and we will have a Q&A all together at the end. For the last session, I will call up my colleague, Helena, who will facilitate discussion.
Thank you very much, Wendy, and thank you to all the speakers so far. This looks like a very, very useful handbook and resource for not only localizing human rights, but concretizing human rights. So for this last session, where we will look a bit ahead and see what opportunities there are to create sustainable results from what has been done here, and also what can be done overall to move forward in the localization of human rights. And we have 3 speakers with us here who will discuss this. I think we will not have, as Wendy mentioned, we will not have time for an open discussion after that, but please send your questions directly to the speakers in the chat. I will also ask the 3 presenters that I will introduce now to speak for 8 minutes each, so we have time for all 3 of you. And our eminent speakers here, we have Hendra Susila Adi, who is a training coordinator at UCLG ASPAC. We have Leticia Clemente, who works at the city government of Baguio in the Philippines. And we have Mr. Mugianto, who is now the Human Rights Advisor at the Executive Office of the President of Indonesia. So no further ado, please, Hendra, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Helena. Good afternoon, good morning, distinguished speakers, all participants of the launching sessions. I'd like to extend a sincere apology from our Secretary General for not being able to speak this session due to the conflicting schedule with in the very urgent matters, and she sent all of you her warm regards, and we should be able to join them for the next session in the near future. And secondly, we are very delighted to that this handbook is finally been completed, and today is able to be launched. So we are hopeful that this guidebook will be of the useful reference of the local governments to work towards the rights protection and fulfillment in the local level. So allow me to speak on behalf of our Secretary General about our commitment to work with our partners, local partners, RWI, universities, and as well as other international organizations to work on the human rights localizations in the context of SDGs. UCID ASPAC is fully committed to working together with RWI and the partners to establish the human rights cities. As we know that, you know, in the context of the SDGs, UCID ASPAC since 2018 and the SDGs achievements, as well as working with all international partners to promote the SDGs mainstreaming into the development planning. So local governments have what you call have the measurement to implement the rights-based approach of a development program in order to accelerate the achievement of the SDGs at the local level. Because as Dr. Nang mentioned earlier, that 90% of the SDGs target are identified in human rights. So I think this is very important for local governments to understand that the SDGs is part of the human rights, and human rights is the SDGs. So when we work to implement or to achieve the SDGs, then automatically you will protect and fulfill the human rights as well. So that's the key points that UCID ASPAC has been working with all of you and also with the local governments. And we are also proud of learning or having our members participating in the PLC on human rights localizations organized by RWI in cooperation with the UCID ASPAC and other partners as well, including Gwangju City. As you know, that Gwangju City is our member as well. We are happy to learn that more and more cities are working towards the human rights cities. And another important point is that national government has been acknowledging the human rights as part of the development strategy. In Indonesia, there's a ministerial regulations number 2021 on human rights cities. I think it's really for national governments to protect and fulfill the citizens' rights by promoting the human rights to the local governments. So I think tool for local governments to implement the human rights by, you know, yes, of the human rights to achieve what we call the human rights cities. So University as part is very pleased to encourage all the local governments to work towards this criteria and measurement. And we also encourage that by 2022 there will be 100 human rights cities in Asia Pacific, 30 globally. So in this regard, that we are happy to be here and to work with RWI and other partners to you know, to develop the handbook of the human rights localization. Because I think this could be a tool for local governments to establish the human rights cities at their own cities or local area. And I also trust that this guidebook will be key reference for all the local stakeholders to work with local governments to achieve the SDGs and the human rights localization. So for the future, that I think would be good if we can continue the BLC as part of the capacity building initiatives from RWI in collaboration with us and other key partners, inviting many local governments, more and more local governments to be involved in this initiative, to be able to learn and to get the knowledge of how to promote the human rights at the local level, at their respective local area. And we could also involve the local leaders to get their commitment, the political commitment, to promote the human rights and their development program. As we are all aware that local government knowledge on human rights varies, and it could be good if we can also, build their capacity, also increase their awareness on the human rights, because I think by 2030 we should achieve the SDGs, and if we stepping aside the human rights, then I'm worried that we could not achieve the target as well. So I think it's we also learned that national governments, aside to the Ministry of Human Rights, the Ministry of Home Affairs also promote the fulfillment of the basic public services. So we have been regulation on basic services, and hopefully that by maybe by March or April, we could launch the new ministerial regulations on basic services, the new ministerial regulation on basic services. So it could be going, in line with the Ministry of Human Rights regulations on human rights cities. At the same time, we could promote the Ministry of Home Affairs regulation on basic public services. So I think it's a good initiative from national governments, and we as local government associations will promote this handbook, and we could also work together to work with pilot cities. Maybe we could choose maybe 5 pilot cities in Indonesia and other pilot cities in Asia Pacific to promote this handbook, and to see how they work on this handbook, and to evaluate, to monitor the progress of the local governments on, the implementation of the handbook. In Indonesia, we could learn that some cities have initiatives on human rights, like Semarang. There is regulation, have the access to the public goods and public transportations. And we learned as well that cities like Jakarta, they have also initiatives on the collaborations, because human rights is collaboration is part of the human rights as well. And the vulnerable group will be protected. So the rights of the vulnerable group should be something that the local government needs to take into account. So I
Thank you.
think that's all. My presentation. I'm so sorry for the noise background, because I'm currently on my way back to Jakarta from Semarang, meeting with the Minister of Home Affairs yesterday. Thank you so much for your attention, and over to you, Helena.
Thank you so much, Hendra. Yes, we had some sound problems, but we really appreciate. I think we heard most of what you shared with us, and I think the role of UCLG ASPAC and the partnership with UCLG ASPAC in the sustainability and the use of this handbook cannot be exaggerated. You're a very, very, very important partner for this. Leticia, are you with us? Yes.
Yes, I'm here. Hello. So it's my time. A very good, very good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to share our experience in localizing human rights-based approach in our programs in Baguio City. Baguio faces challenges as would cities around the world experience, and as an urban, tourist, and educational center, we also struggle to provide the needs of a growing population of 348,000 with a growth rate of 1.25% annually. This pandemic, the basic needs for food, clothing, shelter, health, and wellness have become more evident, especially for the vulnerable and marginalized groups. The Philippines is a signatory to the International Accord on Human Rights. It is committed to institutionalize and provide the guidance framework for all sectors, but the true prime movers to carry this out efficiently rest on the LGUs. At the local level, numerous measures have been put in place to operationalize this state policy. An assessment of current LGU basic services as part of the blended learning course reveal that while there are hints of human rights principles integrated, more often than not, public service delivery just translates people as recipients and economic actors that end up as statistics come monitoring and evaluation time. So after attending the blended learning course on the localizing human rights-based approach in the context of the SDGs, the experience brought to light the very essence of local governance. The training has evolved in me a new perspective in terms of the entire governance process that, with an ultimate goal of sustained improved quality of life of its citizen, the HRBA gives more meaning to their humanity. People's lives matter, and as the saying goes, those who have less in life must have more in law. HRBA as a concept follow a process so that local programs must truly be responsive to the needs of the target beneficiaries. There are tools and templates available to serve as guide in the formulation of programs. So relating to my project study on vulnerable women and abandoned children, the human rights-based approach was employed to come up with strategic and relevant programs for them. Engaging the different stakeholders during planning phase was an essential element. It was a challenge, though, during the pandemic due to restricted mobility. And some may not have access to virtual mode of communication, but nothing is insurmountable when there is cooperation of all concerned. The barangay or the village officials play a crucial role in the process. They are in the know who their neighbors are, and they know the actual situation in their area of jurisdiction. So the barangays were involved in every step of the way. Stakeholders, including youth representatives, voiced out their concerns and gave their inputs. This is the beauty of participation. It fosters seamless formulation and implementation of programs. So part of the process of HRBA is data gathering and analysis. At the time of my BLC, it was difficult to get data from offices as they closed, and most work were done at home, and compounded by the fact that there is no data available, or if there may be, it was outdated. We managed to secure information and data needed with the assistance of line agencies, the barangays, and private volunteer groups. As a result of my BLC project study, adopting the rights-based approach paved the way for the restructuring of our program, project, and activities after undergoing the participatory processes of planning and budgeting. So we were also able to forge partnerships with the private institutions for better coordination, including sharing of resources. And we have updated our gender and development plan that integrates the needs of our LGBTQ+ community. And notable local legislations that promote human rights have been enacted, and this can be a springboard for the human rights-based approach into local governance. And this include the establishment of a barangay Human Rights Action Center and violence against women and their children's deaths. This brings the services of government at the grassroots level. We have updated also our gender equality and development code. The anti-discrimination ordinance was passed to guarantee equal rights free from any prejudice or discrimination on account of religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, health status, disability, and age. And the ordinance mandated all departments in the city government to observe and adopt programs that are aligned to this objective. Another commendable program under health during this pandemic that adopted human rights-based approach is the establishment of a free telemedicine digital platform called Bantay COVID. Telemed is a system managed by the city government through its health services office. It caters to residents who would want to consult a doctor online for any medical problems or concerns. So private practitioners were engaged by the city, and those who were willing to participate in the program were enlisted and categorized according to their expertise. So many heeded this call on a voluntary basis. So this is particularly useful for the vulnerable population, especially during times of home quarantine and lockdowns. Learning from the pandemic experience on lack of data and or outdated data, the city is currently undertaking its own census in partnership with the Philippine Statistics Authority to adopt a community-based monitoring system that generates updated and disaggregated data necessary in targeting beneficiaries. So many initiatives are in the pipeline using human rights-based approach, and localization and institutionalization will not come easy. It is a journey. We need champions to popularize the human rights-based approach to planning, budgeting, monitoring, and evaluation. The BLC, for my part, I should say, jump-started the opportunity to take greater look at our programs in terms of its relevance and effectiveness in addressing the needs of our residents. And in my capacity as a finance officer, I had a way of influencing what may be funded out of our local budget. With the programs just mentioned, they all found its way to the budget starting 2021 and onwards as institutionalized activities. The UN and other international organizations have done so much to advance human rights, and those initiatives should not go unnoticed. What good would it serve when it is not cascaded and felt by those for whom it is intended? Baguio is fortunate to have access to these learning platforms because of its membership to international organizations such as UCLG. And indeed, we are thankful for the opportunities. There are so many LGUs yet needing assistance. And the associations of local governments of each country should be engaged so that they can popularize the HRBA in their respective jurisdictions. The need also for capacity development for LGUs, especially in developing countries, is evident and cannot be overemphasized. We learn best by seeing and actually experiencing HRBA at work through benchmarking activities with other cities, possibly forging sisterhood agreements. Conduct of forums and conferences are helpful to serve as venues for exchanges and engagements across all levels of governments to promote horizontal and vertical collaborations. International organizations may also lend a helping hand by providing grants for capacity development of LGUs that may not have the means. It would also be good if a training needs assessment for all LGUs can be conducted to identify their specific training needs on human rights, and this will also serve as basis for crafting appropriate training tools for them. The handbook that is now being launched today is one example of a capacity development tool that is very useful for LGUs in their pursuit towards the integration of HRBA in their local government processes. And kudos to the people behind this. We will seize this moment and learn and apply HRBA aided by the guide handbook as we transition to a new normal society. Again, thank you once more.
Thank you very much, Leticia. I think the work that you have done, one of the participants in our, you hear the reference to the BLC, that means blended learning course. It's regional courses that we are organizing together with UCLG ASPAC and the city of Gwangju for the last few years. And Leticia was one of our participants in that course. But I think you've done a fantastic work in such a short time also, not only with the participation and many of the steps that we've heard in the handbook, but including getting to the revision of the budgeting aspect of this. So this is a very good example. Mugianto, Mr. Mugianto, the floor is yours, and we got the permission to extend a little bit here. So please, 8 minutes, if we can try to keep to that.
Thank you. Thank you, Helena. Good afternoon, everyone, colleagues and friends, and good morning to Helena Olson. It's very honored for me to be invited here by Raoul Wallenberg Institute for me to speak in front of you all. But before that, I would like to recognize here my friends who have been working on human rights cities. Beside Helena Olson, I see also Bahram Ghazi and also Professor Sin and the researchers here, Sylvia Yasid, and many other friends. I cannot mention one by one, but it's really a pleasure for me to be able to meet and discuss with you all, although it is through virtual meeting. Firstly, I would like to congratulate Raoul Wallenberg Institute and also Parahyangan Catholic University in Bandung, SDGs Center of Lampung University, and RTM Nagpur University, India, for the launch of the Handbook for Cities, Localizing Human Rights in the Context of SDGs. I hope and believe that the book will be very useful and helpful tool for the duty bearers, both central and local government, as well as other human rights stakeholders, such as colleagues at the civil society organization, academia, human rights activists, and also private sectors. As requested by RWI, I will be sharing my thought on how to have a sustainable result based on my learning after working on the promotion of human rights cities for the last few years with many of you here, including with Raoul Wallenberg and also UCLG Asia Pacific and UCLG CISDP and many other friends here also, including colleague I see here from INFID, International NGO Forum on Indonesian Development, the organization I joined before I am at the government today. There are several lessons that I think important for all of us who work to localize human rights. The first, and this is also based on my observation after following the discussion in the previous session for the last, I think, 30 minutes. The first is, I think, it is very important to institutionalize human rights commitments and program in the cities. In the context of Indonesia, the commitment by the mayor, for example, or the region, or by government official is not sufficient. So, and also, we also learn from the experience the importance of sustainability of program from the current mayor, for example, to the next mayor. It is the institution that can or that will bind the incoming mayor, for example, or local government leaders to continue the human rights program and commitment in the local level. It is also this institutionalization is also important to guarantee or to ensure or to give the space on the participation of other stakeholders, particularly in the local civil societies, the communities, and private sector in the local level. In the context of Indonesia, several cities institutionalize this commitment through, for example, the local regulation or the we call it as or the decree of the mayor, for example, the local executive order. That's the way we institutionalize the human rights commitment. The second, we find it is also important to involve the participation of academic society and private sector to engage or to support the local government to realize their commitment, including the civil society. The first is that the public participation is the key for the local human rights program to fit or to address the real need of the population. But it is also important that the participation is not only from public in general, but academic community, because they are seen by those who are, for example, still resistant or hesitant with the civil society to join in, because they perceive or they see academic community in the academia as neutral, for example. So that's my second learning from our work in Indonesia, and that's why the work of Raoul Wallenberg in mobilizing the support from the academic community in this work in localizing human rights is I think very very good, very interesting, and need to be continued. The third, I think it is also important to have more forum for knowing and showing, where local governments and other stakeholders can share and learn good practices and experiences to other local government or human rights actors in developing and implementing human rights program, including to address human rights issues that emerge in particular cities or districts. The forum of this kind that I can identify, for example, is the very famous World Human Rights Cities Forum in Gwangju, hosted by Professor Shin, the Gwangju Metropolitan City, for example, as one of the global forum talking about local government and human rights. And in Indonesia, we also have the Indonesia Human Rights Festival, which is the forum for local government to share and learn practices, and also other forum, either national or regional forum organized by the National Human Rights Institution, for example, and also forum organized by UCLG Asia Pacific, because I realized that UCLG Asia Pacific also have several forums on SDGs and also on human rights, and other forum initiated by different organizations in different level, national, regional, and international. I think that forum is very important to inspire each other. And then, as in the last part, I would like to share also my thought on challenges we have in front of us in order for us to move forward to make our work more concrete. The first is related to strategy. I think we need a breakthrough. There has been, this work on the promotion of local government and human rights has been a global movement. And I think it is very important for UN bodies, for the governments, and also donors organization, including Raoul Wallenberg Institute or organization like UCLG Asia Pacific, for example, to provide support facilities. I think this is important, to provide a support facility. It can be nationally or regionally, to support the local government, local government and local CSO for the promotion and implementation of human rights cities or human rights in the city. I think that is very important, because otherwise there is no breakthrough, and the local communities and local government also need this kind of support. The facilities is not only in terms of funds, but also the expertise. That's why I think that Raoul Wallenberg Institute has pools of experts nowadays, like you all, the researcher. I think you are all very important for this work to provide facilities for local government and local CSO in different countries. And in terms of the issue, I think the second in terms of issue, I think it is also very important that issues related to the management of natural resources is very important, including climate change. We still see how confused the local governments are in dealing with this issue, and also in their relation to the central government, for example. And I would also appreciate and encourage Raoul Wallenberg Institute to play more roles and do more intervention in this area. Lastly, my office, the Executive Office of the President of the Republic of Indonesia, is very appreciative and committed to support the initiative to have the local governments deliver their human rights obligations, not to replace, but to realize and strengthen the human rights program of the central government. And that way, my office work together and support the initiative of CSO, in this case is INFIT, for example, and local governments and the National Commission on Human Rights, or Komnas HAM, in their promotion of human rights cities in Indonesia. Among others is by organizing the Human Rights Festival every year. I think that's all that I can share, Elena. And I thank you very much and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mugianti. I think what you have done both in your current position and with INFID, which also has done very interesting research, I should stress, on human rights cities, especially in Indonesia. I think much of this you call for a breakthrough, and this movement has certainly, there's been so many initiatives from so many stakeholders, and I think we are seeing now the next steps, moving more into institutionalization and a broader work that builds on the backs of all the work that has gone before where we are today. So just a quick wrap up of this session before I hand over to Wendy for closing. We heard from Hendra that talked about the hope that they have within UCG ASPAC that their members will be making use of the handbook and also other learning resources that are provided to move ahead towards 100 human rights cities in Asia. That's the ambition that Hendra was sharing with us here from UCG ASPAC. Thank you for that. We heard from Leticia the very impressive and concrete example of how a human rights-based approach to local policy work adds value, and how transformative it has been for one section of the work in Baguio, especially. And then now from Mugianto, Mugi stressed the institutionalization, how important it is to institutionalize, that the commitment of mayors is not enough to make the human rights work locally sustainable. He also stressed the importance of involving academia, private sector, and also civil society locally to do this, and the need for sharing experiences and supporting one another between governments, local governments, using forums such as the World Human Rights Cities Forum and forums in Indonesia and so on. And we also talked about the need for support to local governments in continuing their work. And we hope that this handbook can be one of the resources for doing so. So thank you so much. I see there's been quite a lot of discussion in the chat. Sorry, we are not opening up for an open discussion, but I hope that you have received responses to your questions, most of you. And I hand over again to Wendy for closing the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helena. Thank you, Mas Mugi. Thank you, Hendra. And thank you, Leticia. And thank you, everyone that stays on. I know we're running a lot behind the schedule, but I've been noticing very interesting discussions or exchanges in the chat box. And I hope we could continue the discussion, maybe not offline, but in other platforms. And as Jason mentioned earlier on, when we start, this handbook is a first attempt from us, and we are very much open to feedbacks. And if you have any questions, or you have feedbacks, or you have any inputs to the handbook, and or you want to have a discussion further about this thematic areas of ours, please don't hesitate to contact me. My email address is somewhere in the chat box just now, and let's continue the discussion, and let's continue promoting human rights, both at the local, but also national, regional, and international levels. This is to say thank you again for all the speakers, for all the facilitators, for my team at RWI. Thank you for staying on in this journey with me, and for all experts, Professor Shin, Dr. Bernadia, Martha Davis, who is not here at the moment, but thank you so much, everyone. This has been a very fruitful and learning journey for me, and I hope we can continue our good work in the next future. Until then, have a good weekend to everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy.